Hi, I'm Prussian Prince, and in this video I'll explain the basic fuel mechanics. Now, Malagans adds fuel, a new resource to Hearts of Iron 4, or to be more precise, the free patch accompanying the DLC adds it, so everyone can use this new fuel resource now and take advantage of it and have all the fun, you know? Anyway, it's required by all types of units, be they on land, sea, or air, with some exceptions when it comes to ground troops. Now, your fuel reserves are shown in the top bar here. And the bar and number there represent how long your nation has until it runs out of fuel, if your fuel production is below your consumption. If that's not the case, and your production is actually above fuel consumption, then it will let you know how long you have until your fuel reserves will be filled. Now, if you hover over the fuel icon, however, you will be able to see several statistics that are important. The first stat shows you your current fuel stockpile. Below that, you have the daily gain, which shows you how much you're getting from 3 possible sources of fuel. The first source isn't really a source, so to speak, it's just the base gain that every nation has, just so that every nation has, you know, a little bit of fuel, even though they don't start with oil or with refineries. Now, the next stat here represents the fuel gain from oil, followed up by your max fuel stockpile, or fuel capacity if you prefer. Below this, you have the current and maximum consumption of fuel for your nation, which is further broken down into the army, air, and navy components, if you prefer to see it that way. Finally, you have the breakdown for the fuel stockpile capacity. Each nation starts with a base of 50k, and each level of infrastructure in that nation increases it by 750. In addition to that, there's also a new building that allows you to increase your fuel stockpile, called the fuel silo. It's right over here. Basically, that one increases the stockpile by 100k, and it costs about, well, not about, it literally costs 5,000 to produce, construct rather, and you cannot build more than 3 in a state. Simple enough, right? Furthermore, depending on your econ law, this can negatively impact the stockpile, so to speak. Undisturbed isolation, which USA starts with, as you can see, this reduces the stockpile by 45%, or should I say stockpile capacity, not stockpile. And civilian economy also reduces it, if we take a look here. Just by 25% though, so not as much. Anyway, now that's done, let's start looking at fuel production and how it's possible to increase it. Just to reiterate, by default, each nation gets 48 fuel per day as base gain. Now, how much oil your nation has also affects your fuel production. To be clear, I'm talking about untraded oil here, so oil that remains in your nation and isn't exported to another nation. There are also technologies that affect your fuel gain. Now, in the industry tab here, there are 2 tech branches that are particularly useful to get if you want to increase your fuel production. You have fuel refining, which is the one on the far right, which increases fuel gain per oil by 20% and fuel gain from refineries by 10% per level. Then you also have the oil processing here, which increases fuel gain from refineries by 50% per level. Which brings me to my next point. As you can see, refineries now produce fuel, not oil. As a base, one refinery produces 48 fuel per day. Again, your nation gains 48 fuel per day by default, 48 from one oil, and 48 from one refinery. This is pretty easy to remember, or just 48 is the magic number. Keep in mind also that fuel is also gained at an hourly rate and not daily. As a final tip, if you're a nation that has a large amount of oil in its grasp, basically you'll probably want to do the oil processing techs more. than say the fuel refinery. Even though fuel refining also wait, no, I've got it the other way around. Okay, so if you're a nation that has actually a lot of oil, you will do the fuel refining because that gives you 20% fuel gain per oil, which is important because you have oil. But if you do oil processing, that doesn't really help you because, I mean, you have oil as natural resource. You don't have refineries, right? So that doesn't really help you as much. However, if you're a nation that doesn't have oil, and this might be more important for you to get and prioritize over the other one, because this boosts your refineries by 50%, whereas this one only boosts them by 10%. I mean, ideally you'd get both anyway, but you know, if you had to pick and choose and you have like no oil that you're gaining naturally, then you might as well pick the oil processing. Like that's simply a better way of getting oil that way. Or you could also import oil if you so desired for, and then refine it. But yeah, again, at the start, refineries aren't really good. They're very cost inefficient, so to speak. Anyway, we're done with fuel production. Now, let's move on to fuel usage. So, let's take a look at one of the preset templates that we have here. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't use this template, but we're just using it for demonstration purposes here. So, land units that have equipment which consumes fuel will use fuel in different scenarios: when training, moving, or in combat. I listed them here from lowest fuel consumption to the highest. So basically, training uses least amount of fuel, and combat uses the most amount of fuel. Or, to be precise, being idle uses the least amount of fuel, because being idle doesn't really use fuel, right? Anyway, they use fuel on an hourly basis, not daily, so it's pretty much in accordance with how you gain fuel, because you gain fuel on an hourly basis as well. Alright, for the stats themselves, let's see. Here you have fuel capacity, which is important to know, by the way, because this does have quite a few implications. So this refers to the stockpile the unit has of fuel. Think of it as sort of a local stockpile. And when this unit, well, when a unit that has fuel capacity, because it's using fuel, drops below 25% fuel capacity, it gets scaling combat debuffs. So basically, the more you go below 25%, the worse your unit will be in combat. Now, for air, each plane has a set fuel usage stat, just like these tanks do. Let's take a look at some airplane, interwarfighter, whatever. Okay, so this has 0.2 fuel usage. Now, transport planes don't use fuel, by the way, as you can see over here. This might be by design, eventually, or not. But anyway, let's take a look at what uses the most amount of fuel and what uses the least. So, fighters use the least amount of fuel, and strategic bombers the most. I mean, tactical bombers and CAS are in between. I believe tactical bombers use even more fuel than CAS also. Let's take a look. So CAS uses 0.2 and bombers use 0.3. I think these are rounded down though, actually, because I do believe that CAS uses more than the other one, but I'm not entirely sure here. Could be wrong though. Anyway, let's talk about the missions. And by the way, I already forgot to mention one thing. Again, fuel is consumed hourly. So, fuel is gained hourly. Fuel is consumed hourly by land units. And fuel is also consumed hourly by air units. So far, so good, right? Anyway, each air mission consumes a different amount of fuel, and also no fuel is consumed when idle. That's pretty important to note. Just like for the land units. Intercept consumes the least, training consumes more, and finally air superiority consumes even more than the amount air intercept does. Now for ships. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at, say, the 1936 carrier hull, just so we can look at something. I mean, normally we wouldn't be building this ship, but just let's take a look at it. So, there's no fuel consumption when idle. I mean, they do have a fuel usage stat, but this means that they will always be using fuel. So, again, no fuel consumption when idle, and they consume the least amount of fuel when training compared to, say, naval missions or being in combat. Being in combat consumes the most amount of fuel, somewhere around 2 times, I believe. Alright, let's go to Logistics tab, and here you will see some other new stuff introduced with and the guns and the free patch. So here we can prioritize fuel for different parts of our forces now, which is quite a nifty feature. Let's say if you want to give your navy more priority, or air, or army. Like if you're Germany, you probably would want to do like this, like drop your navy or something, is my guess. Something like that, for instance. And you can also see the stockpile here, and a bunch of other stats here. So this is pretty useful now that they have added in Logistics tab. Anyway, there's also one more thing that I should talk about in this guide about fuel. Don't mind all this stuff. I have actually cheated to allow all diplomatic actions to happen, because I mean, otherwise I'd have to just continue playing until war, and like, you know, get until world tension is 100%, so I can send a lend-lease to the US. Anyway, let's go ahead and click Start Lend-Lease here and hit this tab. Now you can see that we can actually start lend-leasing fuel with Man the Guns, which adds in our layer of strategy, so to speak. And the amount of fuel that you can send per convoy is 300, by the way. So keep that in mind. So you can actually send quite a bit of fuel per convoys, so to speak. This is something that USA can do a lot, because they have quite huge fuel reserves, so to speak. Anyway, this is pretty much it. I'll personally, well, potentially make a more advanced fuel guide later if needed. Hope you found this guide useful. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. Follow me on social media, and I'll see you next time.